Welcome back to The Bridge with Kira. It's the second hour. It's the 24th of September, and thankfully Oompa Noompa could fill in for Linda, and hopefully we'll get Linda back when she can get a signal. But I do have a fantastic guest for you here in the second hour. His name is DeLion, and he is an herbalist, and I've learned quite a bit from him on his site, Return to Nature. Let's see if we can get him on the phone here. Hopefully this will go more smoothly than... Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Dan. Welcome to The Bridge.
Thank you. Good to be back again.
It is wonderful to have you back. Since we spoke before, I've been looking at your posts and your website, Return to Nature, and I've really been able to up my foraging skills quite a bit just from the resources that you provide on that website. It's amazing.
Oh, great to hear. Happy to hear it. It's what it's all about, the rapid sharing of wisdom and information and I guess our skills, our inherent skill set.
Yeah, and it's a skill set that we really all need to up quite a bit. And because I've been able to forage so much more than this year than last year or years before, I've talked about this before. I had the physical sort of spiritual or mystical experience of the earth providing plenty for us, because I'm there like foraging away, and I just looked up and I was like, there's no way I could eat all of this goodness that's right here before me.
Yeah, that's actually what happened to me when I was about 18 or 19, and I ate my first wild mushroom species and successfully identified it. I realized that I wasn't a complete moron. Our whole society gets taught that it's possible to do that. And, Stephen Buhner, if you're familiar with him, he calls it the wild redeemer. And he has this passage about how when you eat the wild redeemer, it kind of goes in you and your hair starts growing long and your fingernails start growing and you start getting burly. And it starts to turn on, I think, a genetic memory of remembering our skills and our body's purpose and our perceptual, skills. So, we've evolved doing that for possibly hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthals are approximately 2 million years old. So that's in our bodies so deeply, and that's, I think, the thing that we're blocked from. So it's beautiful to hear that you're saying that, and I totally relate, and that's what really motivates me and leads me to try to teach these very basic things,
Yeah, very, very basic. And it's also, I'm like hashtag eat weeds. Start eating them now.
Yeah.
The other experience I had was I don't have to work as hard to get what I need. I can actually eat what wants to grow, not just what I want to grow, but what wants to grow.
That's the whole question. I mean, when you think about what if a tomato grew like a dandelion? Would we be cursing them and spraying them and then buying them in the store? So it's a really interesting question of, how do we transition this whole understanding of what is native, and it's a larger context as we're discussing the pipeline and indigenous community coming together. And we have these new plants here which have spread and I think have become like an underground revolution of realizing that food's on the ground. You're mowing food, you're not mowing a lawn. And the question is, can we adapt ourselves to eating these plants? Maybe they're here for a reason. And the reason is probably that I feel like we never actually left Eden, and the Gaian intelligence or the earth is trying to provide for her children. And we're just so damn confused as to what to do with land that we don't know how to kind of caretake it. Just a heck of a lot in that regard,
Yeah. And people are I always hear people say, like, when I bring my harvest to give away. People are like, well, I don't have a green thumb. I couldn't grow anything. And it's like, you don't have to. Stuff grows on its own. You know,
Yeah.
it wants to live and,
You know,
yeah, and give.
this is the most broken thing that I think we lost with Indigenous wisdom is what did Indigenous people do before agriculture? What exactly was happening? And it's same. So, you know, basically by the time anthropologists started to take Indigenous wisdom and herbalism and medicine making seriously, you know, they were already kind of forced on the agriculture. And, you know, y'all were talking about fry bread, you know, versus like elk and caribou, whatever before that was, you know, this whole transition. But what we didn't record is the actual way of the caretaker. The way that people worked with the land in this sort of 7-generation perspective, and what did they do? How did they manage and spray it with pesticides? So there was a lot of kind of caretaking, but it's very hands off. And there's actually a writer and a forager. His name's Arthur Haynes, and he actually mentioned that somehow weeks.
Can you repeat that? Because you like cut out for a second. Can you repeat about the author?
Oh, yes. So Arthur Haynes, an author in Maine, he actually mentioned that anthropologists found that Indigenous people had approximately a 20-hour work week. Mm-hmm. So hunting and gathering was 20 hours versus what we have now. We're pushing, 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks. So we have this illusion that we have to do and push really hard. But I think that comes from this feeling of being banished, that we're kicked out of heaven, we're kicked out from Eden, and we need to kind of do something and manipulate the ecosystem to provide us with what we need, which is exactly ridiculous because wood just grows on its own, which builds houses, and plants just grow on their own, and we eat them. So
yeah, it's not as hard
as shift.
It is, and it takes a level of trust that we don't have either. Because of that being kicked out of Eden myth, and that we're, original sinners instead of original blessings, right? It is tied in there. And the whole idea of us being separate from nature rather than part of nature, is also tricks our mind. That concept tricks our mind. So what do we do to train ourselves? We're mindful of our language, and we create new language, or maybe recreate language that we used to have, to truly describe what our relationships are with plants, or with the planet, or with each other, or with other forms of life. And I have to mention what the Lakota say. We're all my relations. That spiritual knowing that we really are related, and this is not just spiritual. This is actually biological, and a scientific reality that we've discovered is absolutely true.
It's becoming more and more scientific, and the new breakthroughs in biology, especially with mushroom mycelium and the way mushrooms work and how they're interacting with the entire ecosystem, we really are getting more of a broad science is confirming the indigenous mind, which is really profound to think about, that it's no longer going to be that, perhaps with the eagle and the condor is the idea of the mind and the heart coming together. And this union of these two worlds, which we have perceived to be different, the spiritual reality and the physical reality. And I think this really, it seems that this was really the power of the indigenous ancestors, is that they weren't just in a new age hippie philosophy. They also saw it through the earth. Mother Earth was a living being. And of course, now science has confirmed that, yes, the earth is respiring and breathing, and everything you cut provides gases, and everything is opening and flowing. And, if there was, we don't really know much about pheromones as humans, our pheromone signals and how they interact with each other and choose a mate and choose who we marry and who we feel attracted to and who we feel repulsed by, and all those things are a little more subtle than, what our materialistic values have valued. But if we look to nature as having a language, and the language is chemistry, and if we understand that all of the chemistry that is interacting with nature, like we now know that the smell of a cedar, which human beings have grown to love so much, that smell actually is when a parasitic insect is burrowing into the cedar, that smell comes out, and the parasite of that parasitic insect is attracted by that smell. So there's a whole world of communication, and this is where language, meaning, words, is not the only language. And if we can see ecology like that, and we can see nature like that, then the idea of Mother Nature and preserving the ecosystem for 7 generations, all these basic fundamental principles become obviously better than self-destruction button.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also important for us to, although, we have this shame about what humans have done, I think it's important for us to also realize that we as humans have also resisted from the very beginning. So there are certain movements that when people start waking up, they get attracted to various movements that I think encourage shame for being human. And I think that is just sort of another trick to because we're still thinking we're separate from nature rather than part of it. And so, but I think it's also one step in the awakening or learning process. So it is our spirits calling us to work with that shame and to do something with it. Besides,
and perhaps refine the purpose of our biological function. That's something. It's like, we're one with nature. So does that mean everything we're doing is fine and the pipeline is fine, right? Because that's just nature expressing itself. Or have we lost some of the original instructions? And we're kind of veering off the path because we don't know that we're one with nature. So it's probably something that when you don't think you are one with something, you will treat it differently. Like if you think your thumb, is an opposable thumb, as we call it, then you might want to try to get rid of it. But that really doesn't benefit the rest of your hand. And so that's the whole question, I think, for our culture, all of us together, is to figure out what is our role in nature. What is our role with the ecosystem? How can we live in a more sustainable and harmonious way? I mean, obviously, we need a green revolution. We need a Green New Deal, and it's obviously not going to come from politicians. I don't know what they're thinking or doing or if they have a way out of this mess, but it's so past the need for getting some sort of sustainable paradigm going that we're almost, we're getting to the point of too late. So this call, this cry is so important right now that the indigenous people of the world are uniting, and I see that if they can come together and overcome their differences, that is the most powerful message to the whole world. So I feel like indigenous people need to realize that they are actually in the lead here, and that we are ready to follow their ways into these new paradigms, and they will lead us. And the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the world do have the power. And finally, through the media, we're getting to feel that. We're getting to see that. Believe me, I would rather vote for whoever is in Pine Ridge right now, the oldest medicine person there. I would much rather vote for that person than the options that are being given. So part of my work and part of my hope for manifesting a van and being able to travel is to go find those people and to use social media and to use the fact that we now have, better cameras than NBC in our pockets to allow those people to broadcast messages to us, to the people, about what to do and what is the transition and how to unite and how to actually work together. So that's something I pray for, and I think we all need to really realize that we have that capacity and responsibility now.
Yeah, and I think we all also have, if we don't identify as an indigenous person, we also have an indigenous spirit within every human being, because we were all culturally indigenous at one point in time in history.
Yeah, well, this is actually something I was really contemplating. Is I was watching about Rome and the barbarians, and of course, the barbarians is just another word for the others who we justify reasons to kill them and oppress them. So we have learned a history from the Roman perspective. The Romans were extremely marauding and basically raped and pillaged people. It's starting to sound familiar, right? It's exactly what we did with indigenous people here. So basically, it's a forced historical idea that, the Romans won because they were more civilized and everyone else was a barbarian or a savage, and they use these projected words. We have plenty of them. Commie, just throw it all out there. And what those barbarians are, me as a European-blooded person, those are the Native Americans of Europe. And so we do all have the indigenous blood, and they were walking around thinking about 7 generations, wildcrafting, hunter-gathering, doing ritual, ceremony, prayer. That was their life too. So I really want us all to now find the common. We need to overcome all of the media separation illusions that we keep getting divided and conquered by. So the idea of, indigenous people versus white people also has to be overcome if we're actually going to get anywhere. And we have to realize that we all come from the same indigenous culture source, before paganism was a term, before any of that even existed. We were all in a very common practice, because we were embedded in nature. And of course, we all know somewhere inside of us that nature is sacred. So it's really very important to reclaim all of our indigeneity. We all have that power and we all have that medicine. And I hope that can lead to a next step in our evolution, instead of going, well, okay, we have to figure out Lakota ceremonies. Let's figure out something super naked. What's real for us in this time, in this place? What is the way back? What is the way to feel the pulse of the earth directly without putting it through any cultural filters, but putting it through the present experience that we have together? And that, I feel like, is going to lead the world in some connection to return to nature and to what is sacred for all of us. The underlying principle of all life. So
start becoming an active participant in your own reverse assimilation.
Reverses or decolonization.
Decolonize, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to decolonize our minds, and our hearts, and come together and be the example of the overcoming all this superficial differences,
Yeah, because we are all colonized. Even those of us who appear to be the colonizer are colonized.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there would be no colonizing if the colonizers weren't colonized too. I mean, it's just, the way it is. And the idea of race itself, I think, is, it's a falsehood. It takes away from the reality that we're all related. And I mean, it's based on basically BS. There's nothing scientific about it. Genetically, there's just as much genetic variance between people who are perceived to be of different race than people who are perceived to be the same race. There's just as much genetic variance. So it's kind of another house of cards that's coming down in all of this reclaiming of our indigenousness.
Yeah, well, perhaps the only real race that's relevant in this day is the race against not killing ourselves as a species from utter destruction. I think that's the real race we need to focus on. And I truly think we're in a very desperate situation where, thank God we're fighting for water or standing up for water, because, it seems very odd to me that these I don't know what these corporate people have bottles of water in underground bunkers for the next 600 years or what's going on. But it seems like at some point we're not being able to preserve our basic rights as human beings, and that stuff is getting eroded away every day. So we really need to think about our methods, our tact. And one of the things I've really been amazed by is, and I wrote about this on my website and things, about the idea of, Bernie Sanders really lit a huge fire under a lot of people, but he used the word fight so much. Fight. We're going to fight for this. We're going to fight for that. We're going to fight for this. If anybody knows what's been happening, we understand that the NSA and the NDAA and all these bills were put into place, and we really cannot fight, Humvees and military, and, the police have become militarized. So I really feel like what is going to happen as we rise is that we're going to be provoked into violence, because that's the way that they can handle us. Mm-hmm. And so we really need to be careful, as you mentioned, with our language, the words fight. We have to be very careful with how we frame what we're doing. And the more benevolent that we all can define what we're trying to do, the less use of manipulated media will be used against us, because that the one person who gets the most aggressive and does the first hitting or something is going to be broadcast all over digital media. Mm-hmm. And so we have to really kind of figure out how to be on our best behavior. So one of the things I've been thinking about is how it's basically a no thank you paradigm. It's just no thank you. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not here to fight you. I love you. I care about you. But no thank you. This is far enough. And that's really kind of like, I see the grandmother as the head of this. And, what is a tough love, and what is the union of kind of the worlds of the boundary that we have to hold, but also the compassion, and how basically behind every violent, aggressive man is a baby that did not get their needs met, and maybe didn't get breastfed enough, and is scared and is very insecure. And so we have to figure out how we can Mother Teresa this thing, really come from a place of such a higher level where it's completely unjustified. And that is how Gandhi won independence in India. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be very hard, but this is what's happening.
Yeah. And it never is. We are never, rewarded for doing the right thing. In a rigged system, like we were talking about in the first hour.
Yeah, and maybe in a material way, but the soul feels right. The spirit feels right, and that maybe is our true reward. Is that we know that at the end of our life, when we're dying and on our deathbed, we have no regrets, and we've lived according to our soul's guidance and principles. And I'm sure you feel exactly like me. There's no way I'm trying to die with regrets.
Right.
Like, I wish I did, I could have, I would have, but I didn't. I hid. So now it's all gone to shit, and here I go. That's not going to happen.
Right.
And that's really powerful coming from, especially this pipeline protest, because those people basically are saying, kill us. Like, you've taken everything else. You're going to take our water. Forget it. It's gone far enough. And I think that's a real power. And the question is, will we see morbid violence, and will we all just be, shot point blank, and will the world see the United States hypocrisy as some sort of totalitarian, takeover? Is that what we're in for in the next 10 to 20 years? Or is it true that the people have the power, we just haven't been exercising it? And if we can stay compassionate and caring and soft and grounded and just like, no, thank you, that there really is still a constitution and it means something and we can figure things out. So I think this is probably on all of our minds.
Yeah. And compassion as a spiritual practice, whatever tradition you practice, compassion is a spiritual practice for you. It doesn't matter what tradition you identify with or practice. You can practice compassion and still be within your tradition, because you'll find it in every tradition. At the core of every tradition is this teaching of compassion. And what I think just to go back a little bit to what I was talking about, shame with being human, is that when we begin to practice compassion, because we're under that falsehood that we're separate from God and separate from nature, which is maybe the same thing. It's all the same thing, right? Because we're under that, we're under that illusion. We forget to have compassion for ourselves, because we're so used to focusing outward, so that's been. I think that's a big thing for a lot of people. We have to train ourselves to have compassion for ourselves too.
And to realize the broken parts in ourselves, because that's, ultimately what we have going on. There's a Lao Tzu quote, if there's to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the family. And if there's to be peace in the family, there must be peace in the, partnership. And if there's to be peace in the partnership, I have to find it, it has to be within myself. And that's where we're really going to be tested. Perhaps what's emerging is some sort of universal spiritual realization. Perhaps all the things that we've been calling in, these prophecies, these visions of a consciousness takeover of the planet, this is probably the closest thing we're going to get to. And I just hope that it's in time, and that we're showing up for the work, and that it can happen. Because I really do feel like it's really kind of our last chance. If we continue to be, just stare at our television screens, the water and the air, basic rights are going to be destroyed. I mean, we're getting to the point where we're a global culture, and we could actually change the level of oxygen on this planet to be unhospitable for human beings. Mm-hmm. We literally have the power to kill ourselves now. And so it's very important that people realize that no politician is going to address that. Voting for whoever you want is not going to address that, because the corporate machine is so stuck in its rut that it just needs to be grounded down into very local economy, very local steps. And that's really something that I think is so important, is how do we hit these corporations the hardest? We're going to hit these corporations the hardest by not giving them money. Mm-hmm. So sadly, we're stuck in this forced hypocrisy, which, we're protesting oil, but we're driving, mm-hmm. to the oil protest. We're protesting natural gas, but we're cooking our food on natural gas. Mm-hmm. And so these people are all about the bottom line, and they see kind of these people complaining. But at the end of the day, the CEO is looking at the numbers and going, well, I'm still selling a lot of this stuff. So that's also part of the question is, looking at maybe combining something like traditional skills that Indigenous people had with some of the permaculture principles that are now being discovered. How can we kind of get off those systems dollar by dollar by dollar? Because I totally feel like the most powerful vote that we have as individuals is the vote of our dollar. We don't live in a democracy. We live in capitalism. And capitalism purely is all about where the money is coming from. So we need to kind of reduce our dollar spending in fossil fuels, and that's going to really make a huge difference. So one of the possibilities, one of the proposals that I've been trying to consider is if we define, we all have hard plastic, but we also have like soft plastic, so bottles of water are like soft plastics, and any plastic that's designed to be thrown away after one use, we just have to, as a society, decide that that's not necessary anymore, and have to return to the fact that we used to not need that. Now everybody acts like they need that. So, even something like a stainless steel water bottle, a glass ball jar, cloth bag, this is thousands and thousands of pounds of plastic, which is burning fossil fuel to ship, which is burning fossil fuel to make. Recycling is also burning more fossil fuel to ship and melt down and to put all over the world. And we have to kind of get to the point where we can hit them where it hurts, which is in their checkbooks. So the revolution, if we want to call it that, is going to be with us kind of redefining how we use products, right? How we use materialism, because ultimately what that ends up being is using nature. So how do we kind of reduce our use of nature? In one way, we're chopping pieces of nature up and we're selling it to each other. And whether it's, pieces of paper in the form of money, or whether it's pieces of plastic in the form of who knows what that used to be in nature, we're coming to the point where, wow, great. The value of capitalism is we're selling stuff to each other. Whoop-de-doo. We're going to burn our house down. So I think that's really important that we kind of get to the point of how can we remember how to dig wells? How can we remember how to grow our own food or wild forage? How can we remember to build a water vessel out of clay? These are the indigenous skills that we all need so desperately.
Yeah, and using what you have, that's the hugest revolution there. So, I mean, just that is an undertaking as far as learning how to, like I have acorns, for instance, a pile of acorns. I want to be able to, eat it, eat those acorns, not just the turkeys that live across the street, but I want to eat them too. Simple things like that. Getting off the grid is a huge goal. Because you don't have sovereignty unless you're off the grid and you can forage or grow your own food. You really don't have true sovereignty. You're dependent on the system.
Right.
And so we can't, while we're making this transition, we have to push ourselves, and we can't shame each other for, wherever we are in the process, because I mean, it's we're all there. We're all here in this odd sort of place where we desperately want a different system, but we just seem to still be in the old one. So it's going to take not just the physical changes that we have to make, but as you point out, the spiritual and the intention of this is what we have to do. It's our duty. I did want to talk a little bit more about mushrooms with you, because I know you have a lot of mushroom knowledge, and it's something that I really want to up my knowledge and skills in as well. And I've always had a relationship with them, and I've always seen mushrooms as something, holy, as something sacred and something special. And again, here we are back to science, finding out the amazing properties and abilities of mushrooms that you would never understand. And you also have a tincture right now that that you're offering.
Yeah,
Can
definitely a lot of tinctures, and I'm trying to do a lot of wild crafting because they're basically what's happened is that we're running out of antibiotics because we've overused them as a society, and so there's antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And what's slowly happening is pharmaceutical companies are starting to isolate all these compounds out of these medicinal mushrooms which grow in people's backyards. And so by the time people hear about them and they're recommended in the medical industry for, say, cancer, they're going to be so foreign that nobody's even going to know that they're in their backyards. So a tremendous one is Trametes versicolor, or the turkey tail, which anybody can feel free. I have an article on my blog, on my website, about how to find them and correctly identify them. Those are showing tremendous results in reduction of breast cancer tumors. I think it's Johns Hopkins, as well as I believe Harvard, have done all this research on what they call PSK, which is polysaccharide K, which is out of turkey tail mushrooms. So, of course, the turkey tail mushroom is not patentable. Polysaccharide K, with a little tweak here or there, suddenly becomes patentable. So I'm trying to help people realize and remember that these are your medicines, and these are free medicines, and they basically grow on dead stumps, which sadly, people are forced to get rid of, So instead of chainsawing your dead stump in your front yard, inoculate it with some reishi mushrooms or some turkey tails, and these are extremely medicinal. The other reason that I'm so into them is because we're, through the toxicity of our environment, through everything that's happening in our ecosystem, we're getting a lot of autoimmunity. We're all getting basic autoimmune disorders because we're being bombarded by pesticides and heavy metals and you name it, radioactive material. So they just released a study that showed there's radioactive material in all the water, in all the city water. I'm sure you're surprised. But when that stuff goes into our bodies, it starts to cause autoimmune disorder. And what that basically is that the body starts to fight itself and doesn't know how to recognize what's foreign and what's me. And so we start to get basically systemic inflammation, and that really causes a heck of a lot of diseases. I suspect that in the future, what we're going to realize is that the source of pretty much all diseases is not the symptom that they're telling you about. It's the initial inflammatory problem that's not being checked for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, because we all grew up on Hot Pockets and microwaves and all this horrible stuff, which just isn't food. It never was food. It's a 30-year experiment, and it failed miserably, right? So now we're trying to deal with the fact that our bodies are saying, what did you just try to do to me? And so the medicinal mushrooms are really helpful. It's called immunomodulators. And they help to modulate the immune system, not to boost the immune system. And so they actually bring it back into balance. And actually, even shiitake mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, and even chicken of the woods mushroom, chicken of the woods has been shown to be active against staph infections. So literally, you're eating delicious medicine. And this is really profound. And of course, we can't go into that thinking like, oh, well, obviously, I'll just go look for them and everybody who's listening can just have a free-for-all on the ecosystem. That's, again, coming into it with a capitalistic mind. So we have to figure out how do we actually caretake the ecosystem to bring these beings to our forest and close that home. So maybe that means helping to grow them or helping to caretake the forest in some way, or taking some responsibility to help them regenerate, versus just taking. So be careful about that.
Yeah, and I suffer from autoimmune disease expressing itself in various ways, and so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've experienced the way that the allopathic medicine approaches autoimmune disease is completely wrong. It's not at all helpful.
You will get rid of a headache if you hit yourself in the head with a hammer.
Right.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah. And so, let's just take arthritis, for example. The approach is to suppress the immune system and suppress the symptoms of inflammation. And then you end up with a massive infection because your immune system's been suppressed. And
I think there's a pill for that too.
Yeah, right. There is, and the use of NSAIDs as well. Extremely dangerous and over the counter, and that also messes with your gut flora. And the reason that you have autoimmune disease is your gut flora is out of balance to begin with, because of the assault that your system has endured by just living.
I mean, antibiotics once changes the gut flora for the rest of generations to come. We have no idea what it will do to our children or our children's children's. Even taking an NSAID causes pinprick holes in the intestinal lining. Okay, that gets food particles that are undigested through the intestinal wall, which causes inflammation. So when you're getting told you have something like arthritis, now we're hearing leaky gut syndrome, everybody, leaky gut. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that, because if we've taken antibiotics and Tylenol or whatever, every time we've felt a headache or inflammation, which a headache was probably due to dehydration because we weren't drinking any water, right? Every time we do that, we're damaging the gut lining. So we basically all have severely damaged intestinal walls. I mean, they're supposed to be covered in bacteria, and in the waterways, in municipal tap water, are antibacterial chemicals on purpose fluoride and chloride are put in the water for antibacterial reasons. So we're putting that in our bodies and we're getting sterilized from the inside out. It's basically perfect because it throws off your whole immune function and you become a patient for life, right? So not only that, but if you think about a farmstead and you think about the ability to grow cabbages, so if we were farming, it's not like all the cabbages wait for week to week to week for you to eat them like the grocery store does. They all come at once.
Right.
So in North America, before 1950, there was no grocery store, right? That's not that long ago. Before that, you had 300 cabbages at a time. So you wouldn't just let them waste and throw them in the garbage. We fermented everything. So every culture has a tradition of fermenting their vegetables. So that's another thing which we've stopped putting naturally fermented foods into our diet, which is essential for our health. Like your body craves that and needs that to restore, our intestinal walls. So we had this tremendous fear of bacteria, which led to basically self-sterilization. It's perfect. It's a perfect plan for illness. So, gut lining is healed through any substance that's called mucilaginous, so soothing, cooling substances, whether that's mallow, plants in the mallow family, or sassafras leaves. Chamomile is slightly mucilaginous. Anything that
okra,
flaxseed, okra.
I'm all about the okra.
These are the foods that are going to restore the gut. And people constantly are like, "Well, I take probiotic pills," and that's like throwing seeds on concrete. You don't have the intestinal wall to actually harbor those bacteria to grow naturally. So it's not, that's just symptomatic treatment. That's back to allopathic medicine. But if we're actually soothing the digestive tract and reducing the inflammation through that, because think about it, like bread, and then more bread, and then more carbohydrates, and some potatoes, and some more potatoes, and then some bread. Like that's basically what we just did to ourselves. Yeah. So we very much dried out the intestinal walls. So that's a huge source of autoimmune disorder, all diseases ending in itis, right? So bursitis, arthritis, etc., osteoarthritis, all those things are that's just a doctor telling you have inflammation in a certain place. It's not like a thing. It's like, hey, your car's not working. Thanks, I already knew that.
Right.
So I brought it to you, Mr. Mechanic.
And it also, it tricks us into thinking that these are different disorders. It's all one disorder. Yeah. It's just expressing itself in a different way. And if they can't narrow it down to one thing or two things or whatever, then they just tell you that you have fibromyalgia, which means we're too stupid and lazy to figure out what's really wrong with you.
But
we still want your money.
It sounds really advanced, so it's good enough for me because I've never even heard of that. So, that's the problem is we're misinformed, and the language. I think language is very magical, and so when we hear those words, a lot of people can't really discern through that. So big words kind of just put spells on people, and not everyone can sit there and research on Google for 4 hours at a time. So, those things
mucilaginous,
are.
That's stumped people a few times when I've used that word. Or what does that mean?
Totally.
It means
goopy,
gooey,
slimy. Yep.
Yeah. So
bone broth is another one.
Right. So to top off this fear of, you were talking about a fear of bacteria. Then we were also given the fear. The fear of fat. That is another step in our unhealthiness is fearing fat.
Yes.
And being told that these highly processed fats were the good ones, and the natural ones that the natural world creates for us are the bad ones.
Along those lines, one of the most amazing things is Sally Fallon has an article. It's called "The Oiling of America." Highly recommend that for people to read. And it's basically that story, the fear that cholesterol causes heart attacks, and then here's margarine, which is like plastic or something. Like margarine is like a fossil fuel product.
Yeah, so, it's like one, I don't know, It's almost plastic. Yeah, it's like just a minor change, and it would be plastic in the molecular structure of
It's
margarines.
probably an industrial waste product, just like so
Probably.
much of this stuff. I mean, that's what Roundup is. That's what a lot of these things are. They're like leftover industrial waste that they don't know what to do. So they're like, let's feed it to people. Rebranding. So that's where people need to wake up, and realize what's happening. So
Right.
that we can get that cancer rate down. 1 in 3 is pretty bad.
It's really bad. Yeah, and they're saying now, like, the longer you live, or eventually you'll get it. It's like, what? No, that
I
doesn't seem
mean, I
right to
think
me.
it depends on the diet, it depends
Yeah.
on the lifestyle, it depends on a lot of factors, So that's where I think that, the health food movement and people trying to return to, natural foods that actually are things like avocados and asparagus and, broccoli and cabbage and those things with one word versus, high fructose corn syrup
Hmm.
and, triethionamine moxidase and all these kind of things. Like, that's not food.
Yeah.
So I think that's really going to show, that statistic is going to change a lot. They're not interviewing people who eat healthy organic lifestyles. They're interviewing people like at fast food restaurants or something. It's not
Hmm.
like I was ever interviewed for those cancer rate studies.
Right.
I think that's for most of us. So where do those statistics even come from? And are those just like some bad placebo effect, magic that's put on people to just feel
Hmm.
hopeless and die slow, horrible deaths eating McDonald's,
Right.
instead of realizing that you do have power. You are an empowered person.
You have the power to decide what you put in your body.
Totally.
It's that.
Turns out.
Yeah, it's all on you.
Although,
And
like, that's hard because a percentage of it is coming from the atmosphere,
yeah,
so
yeah, exactly.
like it's definitely a collective thing. A lot of people argue with, well, who's to blame? It's corporations, and the corporations often are like, no, it's the people. And we go back and forth, and it's probably a good mixture of both. We have to change, but we also have to force these corporations to become a little more ethical and environmentally, conscious.
Yeah, it's the people. They demand poison. Well, they're addicted. There's an addictive process to this poison food as well. Um,
Definitely.
so yeah, they're demanding what they're addicted to. It's really hard
Yes.
to get off the donuts.
Right. Which are, if you think about it, all those preservatives and everything,
Yeah.
if they really wanted to just make them cheaper, if they wanted to make donuts cheaper, they would just use like sawdust or something really cheap. So the fact that there's like 30, 40, 50 ingredients, I would like to just invite people the idea that a donut is like some sort of pharmaceutical. It's
Right.
actually genetically engineered. It's
Hmm.
completely genetically engineered for a certain effect. If you don't believe me, look up MSG.
Right.
So, monosodium glutamate, they found out that it increases your flavor taste buds and it makes your stomach not send the messages to your body that you're full, so you eat more at restaurants. So it was put in the food. So these are the kind of things that are happening in these chemistry labs, largely by using our dollars to do it. So,
And sugar's not healthy, but fake sugar is also even worse. And
yeah,
we have to get away from this idea that if you can't have sugar, like say for instance, because you have diabetes, then you have to have fake sugar. No, you don't need either. I mean, you need a certain amount of sugar, but I mean, you don't.
well, we need the sweet flavor,
Right.
and so maple syrup is the sweet flavor. Licorice is the sweet flavor, right? Raw honey is the sweet flavor. Fruit is the sweet flavor. Those things are completely much better than refined sugar, especially if it's chemically refined and especially if it's bleached. Like, the thing that your clothes are bleached and flour and sugar are also bleached.
Mm.
That should be a direct indicator of, whoa, what's that?
Yeah. What's going on here? And
Yeah.
just to go back to the gut flora thing too, that's what fake sugar messes with your gut flora. It's a neurotoxin, a known neurotoxin, and shouldn't really be on the market. Should be illegal, just like Roundup should be illegal, which is in everything,
Yeah.
and it's killing everything. And it's part of it's a huge part of our autoimmune response that we're experiencing right now, is that Roundup is in everything and we're responding to it. It's in our food. It's in our water. It's in
glyphosate, and glyphosate is the chemical they found in waterways. They found in food. They're finding it all over the place. So that at least concludes the argument that it won't get out. It's not going to escape, right?
Yeah.
The genetically modified GMOs are not going to escape. It's not like that stuff's going to get everywhere. Oh wow, duped again.
Yep. Yeah.
But that's where you have to start concluding that, like, man, all these people that graduate from Harvard and stuff, like, how do you get that? It's very hard to think that these people are very stupid. And that's the hard thing of how do we get to the point where we realize, know your enemy in a way, which there are no enemies, but, in that kind of phrase, it's like, what is going on here? Why are we being so bombarded with so many toxic ingredients that are known to be toxic? Is it some kind of, population reduction situation, or do they really just have no idea? And I don't want to answer that question because I don't know, but it needs to start being asked, because how do you get to a point where we're being bombarded on every single level with known carcinogenic chemicals? It's just everywhere now.
Yeah. And we're responding normally. Our bodies, by getting autoimmune disease and cancer and these things, our bodies are actually responding quite normally to the assault. So when you go to the doctor for an autoimmune disease, you're programmed to think that there's something weak about you, something wrong with you, when your body's actually fighting for its survival. It's responding normally. So there is actually nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with what's going on with you, what's happening to you.
Yeah,
that's where the wrong is. But
environmental pollution.
Right.
It's a lot of it is environmental pollution. So back to the idea of standing up for our waterways, and we just need a Green New Deal. We need a green revolution. And this is the kind of thing that Obama, started promising and did nothing. Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling that none of them are going to do anything about it because they're all bought off.
Right.
So it's just a matter of what can we do as a society. We can definitely reduce our use of things. We can definitely consider alternative energy. I think we need to get back to the land. I think we need small communities everywhere which are growing our own food instead of shipping it in from really far away. We need to localize our diets. We need to consider who's the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, who can sew, who makes shoes. Let's get it, whatever it is, indigenous moccasins, anything. We need cottage. We need to rebuild ourselves from the ground up to be full of skills. So imagine an elderly care facility where you can bring your clothes with holes in them, and instead of throwing them in a landfill and buy more from Walmart, these nice little ladies can patch up your pants, and they don't lose their minds doing nothing but eat pharmaceuticals all day. So those are the kind of things that I really feel like we need to start making that shift, from really local ways, is trying to get ourselves into, how can we make crafts that are valuable? So I think about all these invasive plants are here to make the big cosmic joke, which is that they're all crafts. They're all value added. So how about invasive lawn chips, where you mow your lawn and you dehydrate them, and it's like raw chips? There's so many solutions out there. Mm-hmm. There's all these, vines, tons of vines. Let's make dream catchers. Let's make, baskets. Let's make all kinds of stuff, show what these plants can do. And that's really the revolution that I see, is from the ground up. And that's the true green revolution, from actually the plants. So we all know that the plants speak, and that's basically what they told me. These are the secrets I'm divulging. It's their agenda.
And you can find more on your website, returntonature. What is it?
Return.us.
You have videos in there on how to make, how to forage, how to make food. Thank you, DeLion.
Thank you all for the opportunity. Many blessings. Bless the revolution.
More powerful words and powerful vision by our friend DeLion, who I'm so thankful for his website, returntonature.us, I've been able to increase my plant knowledge and my foraging skills quite a bit by the resources that he provides on that site. Please visit it. Check out his GoFundMe campaign that he's got going on right now to purchase a van, which would be part of his school supplies, basically, so he can better travel. I think that it's a very worthwhile campaign. Some of the things that we talked about in the show, I don't think we can stress the importance of having to do things now, having to really... It's okay, baby, come here. It's okay, sweetie. I know. I'm not used to people. One of the things that was reinforced for me this weekend, pretty gray cat is meowing. Pretty gray cat is the second feral cat that I've been able to pet. You can hear the birds are awake this morning, singing away. When we moved in here, we not only became part of the human community that lives back here in the woods, but the animal and plant community as well. And part of the animal community is quite a bit of feral cats, barn cats, wood cats, all kinds of cats, which they like it here. They all seem to find our place. But fortunately, there's a very good catch and release program in the county I live in, and all of the feral cats that we're feeding right now have been so-called fixed, so they're not reproducing. One of the things that gets in the way of my being able to get to North Dakota, not only finances, but all these animals that are now dependent on us. The 2 dogs that we adopted last summer, and the 10 cats that we're feeding. 5 inside and 5 feral cats. Everything is local, right? You gotta focus on your local while connecting and while connecting with the larger community. And whether we like it or not, this is a global society. What we do and say is not only watched at the local level, but it's duly noted in larger arenas. Now that fall is upon us, I had this dream last week about the crested titmouses, and that they were just like everywhere. And then the next day, when I was up and about and doing my things outside, they were everywhere. The hummingbirds that are here are travelers. They're traveling through on their way south. Those tiny little beautiful jewels traveling 3,000 to 6,000 miles every 6 months, back and forth. We used to do that too, back when we were our tribal indigenous selves. We had a summer camp and a winter camp. And this fulfilled quite a few purposes. We didn't spoil any one area. And we got to enjoy more plant and animal diversity. So more diversity in the plants that we were foraging and the animals that we were hunting as hunter-gatherers. The great blue heron is back, fishing in the creek. Hi, sweet pea. Thanks so much for listening. Keeping it real.